Your blood is a lie. The nurse's voice is calm, but the room tilts. A donor's eyes glaze, the chair reclines, a fainting kit slides open. In the back, a manager clicks a counter, 1, 2, 3 racks of vials, while a courier seals a crate marked priority. They call it liquid gold. It leaves tonight. Here's the part nobody tells you. You're not donating, you're feeding a $37 billion export machine that outturns US coal and gold. You get $45 and a cookie. Someone else gets the margin. The United States supplies about 70% of the world's plasma. To see how, we have to rewind. The first cut, how blood became a product. We start in a different kind of emergency room, 194, a conference room thick with cigarette smoke and urgency. The US military wants a way to keep wounded soldiers alive before they can reach surgery. Whole blood spoils, breaks down, and it's hard to move across oceans. The question lands on a biochemist's desk at Harvard, Edwin Cohn. He isn't a surgeon. He's a protein obsessive who thinks in variables and temperatures. Cohn's idea is both simple and radical. Don't move whole blood. Take plasma, the pale liquid, and split it into parts. He builds a method with cold ethanol, precise pH, and spinning separators, forcing proteins to drop out in layers. Albumin, gamma globulin, fibrinogen, each falls at a different point if you're careful. In a pilot plant near the labs, they turn the theory into bottles. Cohn calls it fractionation. The Navy calls it hope. Pearl Harbor becomes the first brutal test. In 1941, surgeons inject albumin into patients in shock. The osmotic pull drags fluid back into vessels, blood pressure stabilizes, and time is bought. By the 1944 landings at Normandy, those tiny bottles travel in medic packs. They don't carry whole blood. They carry a concentrate engineered from thousands of donations. It works so well that by the end of 1945, millions of doses have run through veins on every front. Here's the turn. Once you can separate plasma into products, you've made a market. Albumin saves lives and proves a point. Proteins can be bottled, stored, shipped, and priced. Gamma globulin follows for infections. Coagulation factors arrive in the 196s as fractionation, and later, chromatography refine the cuts. What started as a wartime workaround becomes a peacetime supply chain. But there's a catch baked in. Fractionation needs volume. To build lots of bottles, you need lots of plasma from lots of people. Early drives mix paid and unpaid donors. The faster factories run, the more tempting it becomes to pay. And paying draws a specific crowd, people who need the money. Doctors begin to notice something else: hepatitis cases rising in recipients. Before reliable viral tests, pooling plasma multiplies risk. If one bag in a batch is contaminated, thousands of vials can carry the same invisible hitchhiker. Trust cracks. In the 196s and 197s, the field splits along an idea: blood as a civic gift versus plasma as a compensated source material. Public campaigns push volunteer whole blood as the gold standard for safety. But a carve-out forms for plasma. Language shifts. You aren't selling plasma, you're a donor receiving compensation. This rhetorical move matters for decades, because it keeps the lifeblood of the system labeled as charity even when money changes hands. Meanwhile, engineers push fractionation from improvised vats into industrial runs. Plants grow larger. Chromatography gets refined. Yields improve. Albumin, once the star, becomes a commodity, cheap, plentiful. Immunoglobulin, IVIG, emerges as the engine, used for immune deficiencies and autoimmune flares. Factor concentrates transform hemophilia care before many shift to recombinant forms in the 199s and 200s. A niche salvage operation turns into a product line with sales teams, contracts, and forecasts. The paradox tightens. The more conditions IVIG can treat, the more plasma you need to make it. Each vial represents a slice of thousands of arms, merged in steel tanks, purified, filtered, filled. The ethical stakes are now attached to real people with chronic illness who depend on steady dosing to walk, to breathe, to keep nerves firing. If supply dips, symptoms return. If supply booms, factories celebrate and investors nod. The dial turns on human veins. In the background is a memory we'll return to. What happens when the craving for volume overruns caution? Pooling without good tests carried hepatitis. Later, in the late 197s and 198s, it carried HIV. Those scars shape regulation and reputation to this day, even as the industry insists the past is quarantined. For Cohn, the story never looked like a commodity plotline. He saw protein physics, not quarterly earnings. But the structure he built, deconstructing a common fluid into specialized, valuable parts, made a business logic almost irresistible. Once you can split, you can price. Once you can price, you can scale. And once you scale, you need a dependable river of raw material. Get this, fractionation also changed who counts as a participant. Before, a donor matched a recipient. Now, thousands of donors collectively support one therapy. The anonymity widens. That distance makes gratitude feel abstract, and for companies, turns relationships into contracts. You don't have a line of sight to the patient. You have a schedule. Tuesday and Friday draws, 2 liters a week, keep the centrifuges humming. What nobody knew at the time was just how perfectly this model would fit America's post-war economy. As safety nets thinned in later decades and wages flattened at the bottom, steady, small payments for bodily labor would feel like a lifeline. Plasma centers would become storefronts on Main Street, banks of recliners and televisions where time could be traded for cash. But we're not there yet. We're still in the room with cone, pipettes clicking, thermometers rising, a whiteboard scrawled with pH values. The first cut turned blood into parts, made shock survivable, and opened a door that medicine and business would walk through together. The bottles changed the battlefield. They also changed the map of who gives, who gains, and who takes the risk. From lab benches to production lines to the shipping crate you saw in our opening, this is the arc we're following. The science worked. The system it enabled would ask for more. Now we step out of the lab and onto the sidewalk, where the industry learned exactly where to go to keep the river flowing. The storefront, building an industry on poverty. Step out of the lab and onto a strip of sun-faded storefronts. Between a payday lender and a discount grocer sits the door the industry learned to trust. It didn't land here by luck. Studies that geocoded commercial plasma centers against census data show a pattern that's hard to ignore. Clusters in deep poverty tracts, along bus lines, within walking distance of people who can't afford to waste time. Inside, everything is built to turn need into routine. A screen glows at check-in, ID scanned, fingerprint tapped, a camera blinks, questions scroll about travel, illness, sleep. A cuff squeezes, a quick stick checks protein and hemoglobin, gatekeepers that decide if you earn today. If you clear the threshold, a bracelet beeps you toward a recliner. If you don't, a printer spits out a defer slip that says eat more protein, rest, come back Tuesday. Either way, the system logs your output. 2 a week is the ceiling, and the calendar becomes the metronome. The pitch is gentle and precise. About 90 minutes, $45, maybe $60 if you complete both visits this week. The app turns your veins into a loyalty program, streaks, tiers, referral codes. Chairs face televisions tuned to daytime court shows. The snack table leans salty because salt can nudge your protein number. Staff say thank you as often as they say needle. And the mural calls you a hero because heroes come back. Micro story, a sophomore at a state college runs out of meal plan 3 weeks before finals. He lines up on Tuesday with headphones, opens a laptop, and quizzes between machine beeps. $45 buys groceries. Friday's bonus covers a lab fee. He tells himself it's a bridge. Summer arrives. The habit stays because bridges make good shortcuts. Micro story, a rideshare driver parks under the flickering streetlight and checks her app. Surge is flat, but the center's offering an extra $20 for both visits before Sunday. She needs gas and diapers. She chooses the chair near the outlet, updates the sitter, and exhales when the needle seats. By evening, she's back on the road, a little slower on hills, promising herself a nap that won't fit. Micro story, a construction worker from across the border knows the rhythm like framing studs. Tuesday, Saturday, same hour, same phlebotomist if he can. Work is on and off. The center doesn't ask about status, it asks about frequency and proteins. The card loads by nightfall. The bonus ladder keeps the month upright. Hidden costs don't make the poster. The bus ride is long, childcare doesn't pause, 2 hours in a recliner plus transit can swallow half a shift. Fatigue lands unevenly, stairs feel taller, a cough lingers, a bruise blooms bigger than it should. Most people bounce. Some hover near deferral lines for months, chasing a number that means dinner. Siding is strategy. Zoning treats centers like medical offices, so they slide into retail deserts that lost clinics years ago. Landlords love steady tenants. A bright, clean space offering snacks and smiles reads like community health, not extraction. The optics matter, so does the foot traffic. Language does more work than the centrifuge. You aren't selling, you're a donor receiving compensation. Posters repeat community and saving lives until the exchange feels like service with perks. Churches host appreciation days. Radio spots talk about earning while helping. It's kind. It's also cover for a schedule that, if broken, topples a budget. Meanwhile, there's a second ledger the lobby never names. Those protein and ferritin checks, they're the thin line between a deposit and a deferral. Frequent donors learn hacks, water and salt before a recheck, cheap iron pills to float ferritin, eggs and beans the night before, oatmeal after. Tips pass in whispers, which tech has the lightest hand, which hour moves. Miss a Tuesday and the streak resets. Miss two and the fridge looks bare. Across town, glass-walled offices turn those swipes into leaders, leaders into contracts, contracts into forecasts. Executives talk about supply security, not Tuesdays and Fridays. On earnings calls, donor engagement means the texts you get at 4 p.m. promising an extra $15 if you complete before close. When scarcity bites, the app pings more. When volumes climb, base rates rarely do. The clustering isn't a conspiracy, it's gravity. Put a reliable payout beside unstable work and you'll build a habit. Stack small bonuses and you'll shape a week. Map bus routes and you'll place doors where feet arrive. The centers look like clinics because that softens the truth. This is a workplace without a punch clock, where the raw material replenishes itself if life outside cooperates. And yet pride is real. People like helping. They like seeing a purpose larger than a bill. The mural offers a story you can tell yourself when a friend jokes about selling blood. You say you're donating, you keep it moving. You don't scroll the math downstream, where stainless tanks and chromatography columns turn $45 and a cookie into a vial a hospital buys by the gram. That's where we're headed. From this recliner, follow one leader out the door into a cold chain, a fractionation plant, and a price sheet that converts your time into line items that make accountants smile and patients breathe. The storefront hums because the pipeline needs it. To see how the spread stretches from chair to chart, we have to count gram by gram. Liquid gold math, from $45 to $3,000. Back in the recliner, the promise is simple. 90 minutes, $45, maybe $60 if you clear both visits before Sunday. Upstream, the meter runs on different units entirely. Start with one person, one draw, roughly 880 milliliters of plasma. Keep a Tuesday-Friday rhythm for a year and you're near 90 liters. No plant talks in chairs, plants talk in tanks. A single batch pools tens of thousands of liters, because the treasure in plasma isn't volume. It's dissolved proteins measured in grams. Fractionation is the art of teasing those grams out. The line still echoes Edwin Cohn's wartime method: cold ethanol, tight pH, staged precipitations, upgraded with modern filtration and chromatography. First, albumin, the pressure stabilizer that keeps vessels from collapsing. Then immunoglobulins, mostly Ig-G, the workhorse behind IVIG. Then clotting factors and other proteins extracted at narrower cuts. Each fraction passes through virus inactivation, heat, solvent, detergent. Then polishing columns that move a decimal point on purity and yield. Translate the recliner into clinic math. Patients don't see liters, they see grams. An adult with primary immunodeficiency often needs 0.4 to 0.6 grams of IVIG per kilogram monthly. That's 30 grams for a 75 kilogram person, sometimes more during flares. Hospitals buy by the gram. Contract prices move with shortages, but a common band sits from roughly $60 to $100 per gram and higher when supply thins. So a single 30-gram infusion can carry a drug cost of $1,800 to $3,000 before a nurse even spikes the bag. Now put that beside the chair. The donor earns about $45 per visit. Sometimes a promotion bumps it to $60. Averaged across products and geographies, that same leader downstream can realize hundreds to over $1,000 in revenue once split into albumin, Ig-G, and other fractions. Analysts label it yield optimization: more Ig-G per liter, better mix, fewer rejects. In plain speech, it's the spread, and it's not a secret. Earnings calls celebrate collection growth and favorable pricing, while base donor rates barely move year to year in many cities. Follow one leader to feel the conversion. It leaves the storefront on Friday, cold packed to a hub, then a plant. It's pooled with thousands of other leaders inside stainless steel that looks like a brewery for ghosts. After fractionation, a sliver of its Ig-G is blended into an IVIG lot, stamped with a number a hospital pharmacist can trace. Weeks later, that lot drips into a teenager's vein and her infections finally ease. That's the part nobody argues with. The therapy works, and for many, there's no substitute on the shelf, but the spread shapes behavior up and down the chain. If every leader holds $500 to 1,000 plus of realizable value, the smartest lever isn't raising pay at the chair, it's smoothing volume. Hence the streak bonuses, holiday surges, Sunday hours. The metronome 2 a week is written into FDA rules that cap frequency and set protein and hemoglobin thresholds. On paper, those rules are safety. In practice, they're also an operations manual. Apps ping the moment your interval clears. Staff aim for completes because idle chairs mean idle tanks months later. There's friction that never hits a spreadsheet cleanly. Every unit is tested, every donor is screened. If your total protein dips below threshold, you're deferred, no payout, no leader. Enough deferrals and the local site misses its target, but the plant protects its release rate when lots face regulators. So centers steer around blockages. Salty snacks to bump a same-day recheck, reminders to hydrate, quiet tips about iron pills to keep ferritin floating. None of it is sinister. All of it is about throughput. Push too hard and you jam at the lab door. Support too little and you burn the base you need. Meanwhile, demand keeps rising. IVIG has crept into more indications over decades, and an aging population leans on it harder. Albumin is global, moving into ICUs and surgeries from Guangzhou to Berlin. Trade rules keep borders friendly to biologics, so a vial processed in Texas can reach a clinic in France with less friction than a box of peaches. That reliability keeps the market comfortable with the spread. Patients feel it as stability. Investors feel it as guidance. Donors feel it as text. Micro story, a hospital buyer scans the week's allocations. 90% this cycle better than last month. She shuffles appointments, approves a brand switch, and breathes. Across town, a center manager posts a whiteboard goal and messages, extra $20 if you complete today. The donor who needed gas reads it in line. He completes. A plant in another state nudges its utilization a notch. The buyer never knows his name. The donor never sees her spreadsheet. The decimal that mattered sat hidden inside a gram. This is the quiet conversion at the heart of the business. $45 at the chair becomes 3 digits per gram at the pharmacy. The science justifies pieces of it: cold chains, compliance, validation, the cost of getting safety right. But the difference between necessary cost and practiced margin lies in choices. Where to cite, how to incentivize, how flat to keep base pay while touting value creation. The math pencils because policy lets it, and the pipeline holds because Tuesdays and Fridays do. Now ask the next question. Who wrote the rules that make those Tuesdays and Fridays indispensable for the entire world? The legal loophole. Why the US became OPEC of Plasma. To see who wrote the Tuesdays and Fridays into law, we have to step into the rulebook. Most wealthy countries draw a bright line. You can't pay for blood components. The United States draws a curved one. You can pay for plasma, not whole blood plasma. That carve-out is the hinge. Because of it, the United States now supplies roughly 70% of the world's plasma, exporting finished products that in 2023 brought in around $37 billion, more than coal and gold. How did the line bend there? Safety language opened the door. Regulators separated whole blood donation from source plasma collected by apheresis. Industry leaned hard into the difference. You aren't selling plasma, you're a donor receiving compensation. Those words slip past bans aimed at preserving altruism in blood. Abroad, hospitals still pitch unpaid whole blood drives. Plasma arrives as a pharmaceutical input bought from US firms. Clean labels, batch records, invoices. The Food and Drug Administration then set the metronome. Up to 2 plasma donations per week with required intervals, screening every visit, infectious disease testing, minimum total protein and hemoglobin thresholds. On paper, that's about recipient safety and donor eligibility. In practice, it's an operations manual. If you tell a system how often its donors can produce and exactly when they're eligible again, apps will ping at the minute mark and chairs will fill on schedule. While that cadence settled in, global policy hardened around it. Many European countries restrict or discourage payment for plasma collection. Canada wrestled province by province, paid in some places, banned in others. Asia imports heavily. This patchwork created a quiet dependency. Ministers could defend unpaid domestic blood while signing multi-year tenders for plasma-derived therapies sourced from paid Americans. Ethics stayed local, product went global. When you hear supply security in procurement, this is the subtext. Borders turned into supply valves. Centers within reach of Mexico, and in some cases, Canada saw cross-border donors build routines around visas, day labor, and bus timetables. The The system didn't need to ask about immigration status. It needed government-issued identification, clean screens, and compliance with frequency caps. When pandemic travel paused those routes, collections dipped. Months later, hospitals rationed IVIG. A stress test wrote a note in the margins. Reliability rested on people with the least slack. Industry helped draft the margins. Trade groups wrote best practice papers that read like dry regulation. Executives cycled through advisory committees and back to boardrooms. Lobby disclosures tallied millions to defend compensation for plasma and to tout safety improvements, nucleic acid testing, solvent detergent inactivation, quarantines that did, in fairness, transform recipient safety. The revolving door didn't have to be sinister to be effective. It just had to be consistent. Trade law smoothed the conveyor. Agreements harmonized biologic standards, sped customs, and discouraged sudden barriers on plasma-derived products. A vial processed in Texas could reach a clinic in Germany with less friction than a crate of fruit. Patients benefited from predictability. So did companies, buffered from local political flare-ups by global contracts and redundant routes. If one country blinked, product detoured. Listen to hearings and you'll hear the same phrases. Community donors, compensation offsets time and travel, critical, irreplaceable therapies. None of that is false. It's selective. It centers recipient safety and glides past labor conditions that make 2-a-week collection reliable. The Food and Drug Administration doesn't set wages. Labor agencies don't recognize high-frequency donors as workers. Health departments, focused on recipients, don't compile long-term donor protein and ferritin data across firms. Safety gets regulated where regulators have jurisdiction. Everything else becomes assumption. State houses filled in the zoning. Classify centers as medical offices and clustering slides through areas hungry for tenants. If residents push back, moratoria appear, temporary, porous, and often shifting demand to a nearby town. Meanwhile, siting lands along bus lines and in retail corridors where a storefront can pass as a clinic. It's legal design doing logistical work. There's a paradox stitched into the statutes. The safer manufacturing got multiple virus inactivation steps, lot holds, nucleic acid tests, the easier it was for lawmakers to defend compensation. Recipient risk dropped, so the ethics debate upstream went quiet. But recipient safety doesn't answer the labor question. Who bears the biological cost of meeting policy-permitted frequency over months and years? In a system that doesn't classify donors as workers, that answer never gets codified. It gets lived. Micro story, a border town manager watches collections sag when a bus route changes. She extends hours, raises referral bonuses, and gets a nod from corporate to add Sunday chairs. Volumes inch back. Months later, a hospital 2 states away sees allocations stabilize. The regulation that mattered most wasn't a statute. It was a timetabled loop that poor commuter could make. This is how the United States became the OPEC of Plasma, not by decree, but by a stack of choices. A legal carve-out defining compensation as compatible with donation, federal rules that set an extractable rhythm, trade architecture that rewarded throughput, and international policies that kept demand high while pushing ethical friction offshore. It's stable until life at the margins isn't. And when the margins move, the world's IG budget moves with them. We built the pipeline with statutes and semantics. To test its strength, we have to step back out of the hearing room and into the recliners. The pamphlets say it's safe. The logs say adverse events are rare. Safety. The bodies that keep the metronome tell a longer pamphlet hits the right notes. Modern tests, strict screening, rare adverse events. And for recipients, that's true. Nucleic acid testing, solvent detergent steps, heat treatments, those layers drove viral transmission risk down to the floor. But donor safety runs on a different ledger. It's not one bad outcome in a chair. It's a slow drift you only see if you follow the same person through months of Tuesdays and Fridays. Start with what people feel before any number drops. Lightheaded when they stand, headaches that track with donation days, bruises that map a forearm because a needle slipped or a vein blew under time pressure, a cough that lingers because sleep is thin. Centers build faint rooms for a reason, fans, juice, cots behind a curtain. Most incidents resolve in minutes and get logged as minor. That's the acute picture. The chronic picture lives in protein. Source plasma isn't red cells, so iron loss looks small. But the machine still pulls proteins, albumin, immunoglobulins, and fluid volume your body has to replace. If you're well rested and well fed, you bounce. If you're stitching bonuses into a rent calendar, you live on the edge of deferral. Longitudinal studies of frequent donors show what staff see anecdotally. Total protein and ferritin trend down in high-frequency cohorts. Many recover with rest and diet. But recovery needs time and food that scarcity taxes. Rules try to guard the rails. The Food and Drug Administration caps frequency at twice a week with set intervals. Each visit checks vitals, screens for infections, and requires minimums for total protein and hemoglobin. On paper, it looks like a net. In a busy center, it feels like a timer. Quotas ride on completes, not on quietly sending someone home to sleep. A borderline protein, water, salt recheck, dizzy mid-cycle, feet up, fan on, finish if stable. None of this is villainy. It's throughput logic in a place that buys biology. Here's a gap you can't see on a poster. Companies report serious adverse events to regulators. What's thin is shared long-term data that follows frequent donors across centers and years. If someone rides new donor bonuses from one franchise to another, no single system holds their protein and ferritin arc. Without a linked, public dataset, safety is audited in snapshots, not in films. The industry says adverse events are rare. That can be accurate for acute reactions and still miss cumulative depletion in people who don't have slack. Micro story, a single parent in a food desert times plasma to daycare hours and a warehouse shift. On Friday, her total protein dips below cutoff. Deferred, she's told to rest and eat more protein. The pantry says pasta and peanut butter. Tuesday, she squeaks past threshold and completes. This repeats for weeks. Nothing catastrophic happens in one draw. The harm, if it comes, arrives as fatigue, missed work, or easier infections over a season. Add the needlework. Staff turnover. Training helps, but speed erodes finesse. Blown sticks, infiltrations, hematomas. You feel those days later lifting a box or buckling a child. They're logged as minor. Stack them for a year and you start favoring one arm than the other. Some donors learn to refuse a novice phlebotomist by name because the wrong hand makes the next week harder. There's an immunity question donors whisper about that science hasn't closed for high-frequency, low-resource groups. Does removing Ig twice a week for months make you more likely to catch what's going around? Many people reconstitute fast, others lag. Studies suggest immunoglobulin dips recover with time, but time costs money in this system. Without transparent, pooled data on frequent donors' infections, the debate stays stuck between reassurance and rumor. The industry's defense is familiar. Strict screening, tight thresholds, rare serious events, all true and incomplete. Because the risk the model externalizes isn't a spike on a chart, it's the physiological cost of keeping a predictable rhythm when life isn't predictable. When a donor misses a visit, a budget stumbles. When a budget stumbles, rest vanishes. When rest vanishes, borderline metrics become normal. Safety becomes a moving target. A person chases with salt packets and generic iron. Micro story, a home health aide donates Wednesday mornings, then lifts clients all afternoon. By November, stairs feel steeper on donation days. She starts shifting heavier tasks to Thursdays, but holidays blow up schedules and she pushes through. January brings a cold she can't shake. The center defers her once, then twice. She loses the streak bonus and buys cough syrup with grocery money. Nothing here makes a headline. Everything here explains why the metronome stays reliable until it doesn't. Recipient safety got engineered into redundancy. Donor safety got eligibility rules and trust that people would self-regulate. Most do until rent is due. The system counts on that discipline, then calls it generosity. To see the cost of that bargain at scale, you have to leave the chair and sit with the people who buy what those proteins become and what happens when the pipeline tightens. The donor economy. Survival on 880 milliliters. Step outside the pamphlet and into a kitchen where the month starts crooked. The rent cleared, but the car insurance drafted early and the fridge is condiments and wilted lettuce. The center's app pings, complete both visits this week, earn an extra 20. That's gas and 2 dinners. The calendar clicks into place. Tuesday becomes plasma, Wednesday the long shift, Friday plasma again, Saturday laundry and groceries. It's not a windfall. It's a bridge that always seems to end just before solid ground. The rhythm is precise because the costs are 2 hours in a chair, plus transit, plus the sitter you text from the waiting room. $45 loads by evening, $60 if you hit the streak. Miss Tuesday and the ladder resets. Miss Friday and the pantry feels it on Sunday. The center knows your intervals to the minute and nudges you when you clear them. You answer because the meter on your life runs in small denominators. Quarters at the laundromat, $5 for cough syrup, a late fee that blooms if you're a day slow. Micro story, a single dad with a 7-year-old times plasma to school pickup. He books the 1:15 slot, grabs the chair by the outlet, and flips flashcards for a certification exam while the machine hums. The card loads by 6. He buys chicken thighs and rice, then reviews dosage calculations after bedtime. When overtime hits at the warehouse, he slides plasma to Sunday morning. The sitter charges more on weekends. The streak bonus covers the sitter. The balance holds barely. Micro story, a barista with unpredictable shifts lines up after a lunch rush. She learned the hacks the hard way: salt water before the recheck, eggs and beans the night before, oatmeal after. Cheap iron tablets keep ferritin from dipping below cutoff. She shares tips in whispers. Who has the lightest hand, which hour moves fastest, when the center quietly expands hours to chase volume. The tricks aren't about thriving. They're about not losing a week to a deferral slip that reads like a bounced check. Gig work braided with plasma has its own math. Tuesday plasma pays for gas to chase Wednesday night rides. Friday plasma funds the Sunday grocery run, so Monday's paycheck can kill a late fee before it metastasizes into a shutoff. Referral bonuses turn donors into recruiters. Bring a friend, both get 25. You end up coaching someone through their first intake because 2 households are trying to stretch a coupon that calls itself appreciation. There's a quiet ledger the app never shows. Fatigue taxes everything. A courier who donates Friday afternoon takes highway ramps a shade slower at midnight. A home health aide who lifts clients after 2 draws a week catches colds easier and shakes them slower. None of this triggers an incident form. It shows up as a week that runs heavier than it should, as a second cup of coffee on Thursday you didn't need last spring. Stigma rides shotgun. Some donors don't tell coworkers, worried a manager will think they can't handle heavy days. College kids keep it from parents who mail small transfers with big expectations. A grandmother tells her church she's volunteering at a medical center. It's not exactly a lie. It's an edit that makes the exchange livable in a world that calls hustles noble until the hustle is your body. The mural inside helps. Heroes sit here. Thank you for saving lives. That language does real work for morale. It also papers over the labor. When a friend jokes about selling blood, you correct them, you're donating. The word smooths the edge. It lets you believe 2 things at once. You're helping someone you'll never meet, and you're holding your week together. Both are true. Only one loads on a prepaid card. Micro story, a nursing assistant finishing her LPN studies turns the chair into a study hall. She prints flashcards, tucks them into a tote, and mutes patient education videos about IVIG while the machine ticks. She promises herself she'll quit after boards. She passes. 2 months later, rent spikes and the car needs brakes. The app pings fall frenzy bonus. She hesitates, then books Tuesday. Graduation didn't erase the math. It just changed the story she tells about how long she'll keep playing it. The numbers upstream stay abstract: yield optimization, capacity utilization, allocation emails. In the donor economy, numbers are immediate. 12 bus stops, 9 minutes late, $45 by 6. The $500 to $1,000 downstream value per leader never appears in this spreadsheet. What appears is a referral ladder, a hoodie giveaway, a grocery raffle. If the market valued the raw material like the finished gram, this budget would look different. It doesn't. So biology gets scheduled. This isn't failure of character. It's policy expressed as routine. When wages stall, when daycare costs bite, when sick leave is theory, plasma becomes the only place in town where time turns into cash by nightfall, and a thank you makes it feel less like work. People learn the metronome because the metronome learns them. And as long as the pipeline measures success in steady leaders, the donor economy will keep time, 1 880-milliliter bridge at a time. The buyer's club, big pharma's dependency. Unknown to the people timing salt packets and bus routes, their Tuesdays and Fridays feed 4 names that show up on earnings tickers. CSL, Grifols, Take to Octapharma. They learn the same lesson early. Scale is safety, and in plasma, scale is profit. They don't run corner clinics for charity. They run networks the way airlines run hubs: synchronized routes, forecasted capacities, hedges for delays, and a control tower that speaks in liters, yields, and release rate. Walk a plant floor and the stakes click into place. Stainless towers rise like silent cathedrals. Pools hold tens of thousands of liters while engineers ride the variables: cold ethanol steps, solvent detergent baths, heat holds, chromatography resins swapped on schedules tighter than flight plans. A decimal moved in the right direction, a fraction of a gram more Ig per liter, pays for a new line and shows up on the next call as process intensification. Meanwhile, albumin stays the workhorse commodity, but IVIG is the engine, the reason every tweak to yield gets a slide. Contracts lock in the tempo. Distributors and hospital systems sign multi-year agreements that set floors on volume and clauses for shortages. When inputs thin, prices rise. When batch releases lag, allocation emails land like weather alerts. The economics are blunt. The United States supplies about 70% of global plasma, and finished blood-derived products exported from here brought in roughly $37 billion in 2023, more than coal and gold. That figure glows in investor decks because it says the thing plainly. Plasma isn't a side hustle, it's a pillar. Dependency sounds abstract until you sit in clinic chairs. A teenager with primary immunodeficiency wraps a blanket around her legs for a monthly infusion. A dad with CIDP times IVIG so he can button his shirt without shaking. A kid with Kawasaki disease needs IG to quiet an immune storm. These patients don't care about yields, they care about nurses, chairs, and whether a bag with the right lot number shows up on time. When allocations slip from 100% to 80%, they feel it as tremors in bodies they've finally learned how to steady. Inside boardrooms, the job is to prevent those tremors with levers that don't touch pay at the chair. The levers are volume and mix. Add centers in neighborhoods that already hum at 2 a week, extend hours, offer double points weekends, improve donor retention with streak ladders. In plants, chase favorable mix, more IG, fewer rejects. On paper, it's optimization. In people's lives, it's more pings at 4 p.m. promising an extra 20 if you complete before close. Shortages test the system's story. During the pandemic, cross-border donor flows slowed, unemployment checks briefly outcompeted base payouts, and collection volumes sagged. Months later, fractionators felt it as light pools, hospitals rationed. On earnings calls, executives labeled it temporary headwinds, then ticked off fixes. Sign-up bonuses, Sunday shifts, essential worker lobbying, accelerated center openings. Quarter by quarter, the levers worked. The lesson was hard and simple. When precarious lives wobble, a global therapy chain wobbles. Protection sits in lawsuits and patents too. Proprietary fractionation tweaks and validated quality systems are both science and moat. A new plant takes years, hundreds of millions, and regulator trust. Those walls keep challengers small. Consolidation fills any gap. Buy a standalone center network, standardize operations, feed captive leaders into own tanks. Patients hear resilience, competitors hear barrier. Towns see more storefronts with murals and referral posters. PR completes the loop. Corporate videos feature grateful patients and cheerful donors leaving with snacks. Taglines frame medicines as made from the generosity of donors, while finance copy says we secured supply with targeted incentives. Both are true in slices. Neither mentions the structural spread. $45 at the chair against hundreds to 1,000 plus per liter realized downstream, justified by cold chains, compliance, validation, and buoyed by policy that made paying for plasma normal here and rare elsewhere. Micro story, a hospital buyer watches her inbox. Allocation, 90% this week, brand substitution approved. She reshuffles neurology, calls rheumatology, and okays a one-time switch. Downstate, a center manager messages extra $20 if you complete today. A donor who needs gas replies with a checkmark. Weeks later, the buyer never knows the name behind the leader that made her math work. The donor never sees the spreadsheet that kept a teenager's slot. The bond is real and invisible. Executives talk about moving up the value chain. In plasma, the value chain begins at a door between a payday lender and a grocery and ends in a clinic where a nurse spikes a bag. The buyer's club sits in the middle, turning leaders into products with astonishing safety for recipients and a business cadence tuned to a metronome the Food and Drug Administration wrote into law. It's efficient and fragile at once. Efficient because decades of engineering shaved risk. Fragile because the front end runs on people who can't afford to miss a week. Unknown to those people, their reliability props up guidance numbers and keeps infusion calendars steady. Known all too well to them, missing one Tuesday can mean a late fee. The pipeline depends on both truths holding at once. And when either side slips, the bus route, the bonus, the border, the batch, the tremor travels the whole line until a nurse says, "We have to space your dose." And a poster in a storefront adds another balloon to the milestone donor's wall. When the pipeline breaks, shortages and rationing. It didn't start with headlines. It started with a missing pallet and a careful email. Allocation this week may be reduced. Then the metronome slipped. Cross-border donors stayed home. Buses ran half schedules. Unemployment checks briefly outpaced base payouts, and Tuesday, Friday turned into maybe next week. Collections dipped. Those light weeks became light pools months later. Pharmacy fridges felt it as empty space where IVIG usually sat. On infusion floors, nurses reworked calendars with pencils. Monthly became every 6 weeks for some, 8 for others. Neurology huddled with pharmacy. Oncology argued its cases. Rheumatology stretched where it could. The euphemism was conservation. Patients felt it as tremors. Tingling crept back into fingers. Infections returned after years of quiet. Stairs got steeper. A parent who hadn't heard a wheeze in months sat up at 2 a.m. counting breath. Micro story, a teenager with primary immunodeficiency owned first Friday mornings, blanket math quiz, IVIG bag humming. The call came, we need to push to next week, then the next. By the third delay, a sinus infection landed her in urgent care. Her mother kept it together with insurance, then cried in the parking lot. When the bag finally spiked, the nurse said, "We're catching up." Everyone told partial truths to keep faith intact. Upstream, companies yanked levers. Sign-up bonuses spiked. Centers stayed open later, added Sunday shifts, blasted double points weekends. App pings multiplied. New chairs appeared where 2-a-week habits already lived. Trade groups lobbied to classify staff and donors as essential. Some borders loosened for medical travel, others didn't. Plants ran overtime when inputs arrived, then idled between runs. Executives called it navigating supply headwinds. Donors called it extra 20 if you come in this weekend. Hospitals tried back channel swaps. Buyers traded allocations like scarce seeds, 10 grams here for 20 there, calling colleagues to borrow a case until the next shipment. Pharmacists rechecked dosing calculators when substitute brands arrived. Lot-to-lot differences meant adjust, monitor, hope. Prior authorizations jammed when insurers balked at substitutions. Nobody wanted to cancel. Cancellation became a quiet daily ritual. In kitchens, rationing read as choices. A man with CIDP, stable for a year, felt his hand slip. He started fastening shirts differently. Pediatrics often held priority, so a child with Kawasaki risk got egg on time while adults waited. Rare disease forums lit up with tips. Hydrate, rest, be kind to nurses, loop in your rep. Advocacy groups mixed gratitude and pressure. Thank you for protecting supply. Please no delays hurt us. The brittleness showed its seams. When you depend on predictable scarcity, people with tight budgets showing up twice a week, you're exposed to anything that gives them slack or steals their bus route. Stimulus checks, daycare closures, quarantine orders, rumors, each shaved the collection curve. A machine designed for volume discovered it had built no cushion where it mattered most, the front door. Micro story, a center manager watched the line thin from 20 deep to 5. She sent staff to the sidewalk with flyers, raised referral bonuses, posted "We're essential." She also stocked more crackers and added a fan in the faint room. Some days she hit targets, others she missed and drove home past a shuttered diner where 2 donors used to work. In meetings, she called it engagement. In her car, she called it hope. Patients adapted because they had to. Some shifted to subcutaneous dosing at home to stretch IVIG. Others tried alternatives with mixed results. A few landed in the ER when a tightly managed disease snapped back. Clinicians wrote medically necessary in heavier strokes. CFOs watched drug lines bulge and margins thin, then signed the next multi-year contract because options shrank. By year 2, volumes climbed. Bonuses eased, hours normalized, allocation emails softened. The industry congratulated itself on resilience. The charts hit a simpler lesson. The pipeline wasn't pipes. It was calendars owned by people on the edge. When their lives moved, the world's IG moved. When those lives steadied, so did the vials. This is where the story pivots from logistics to language. Shortages answered the question boardrooms avoided. Are we running a charity powered by donors or a labor system without labor rights? The fix worked this time. The next shock will come. Before it does, we have to look at the narrative that kept everyone calm while shelves thinned. The words that turned work into a language machine, scarcity into selling donation. The shelves thinned, but the script didn't. While nurses redrew calendars, collection centers kept their posters bright. Heroes sit here. Thank you for saving lives. The word that held it all together was donor. It wrapped a Tuesday transaction in Sunday service and turned a payout into a pat on the back. Language here isn't garnish, it's scaffolding. Start with donation. It suggests a gift with no wage attached, moral credit without material price. Pair it with compensation, a word that sounds like reimbursement for gas and time, not pay for biological labor. Add community, which promises you're part of a circle bigger than your bill. That trifecta reframes a market exchange as a civic ritual. Walk the walls, first names on paper droplets. Why donate cards pinned to cork boards for my grandma, for my neighbor's kid? Snack tables with balloons for milestone donors. Phone cameras ready for a selfie under a Saving Lives mural. In those frames, you aren't earning, you're serving. The prepaid card that loads by evening slips into the background like a bus pass. The vocabulary is careful at every touch point. Staff are trained to thank you, not pay you. We appreciate you. You're making a difference. When money has to be mentioned, it becomes compensation will load by 6 p.m. The app copies the tone. Rewards, loyalty tiers, streak bonuses. It's a frequent flyer program for your veins that never calls the miles what they are, hours and proteins converted to cash. Outside the door, the echo continues. Local radio hosts pitch earn while you help. College newsletters spotlight scholarship tie-ins. Churches host donor appreciation Sundays with coffee and muffins. A minor league team flashes plasma night between innings. None of this is sinister. It's smart brand work that blends altruism and commerce until you forget there's a price per liter, a realized value down the line, and a ledger that always balances in favor of the buyer. The script travels upstream. Corporate videos spotlight cheerful staff and grateful patients, then roll the tagline, medicines made from the generosity of donors. Finance copy for the same company says, we secured supply with targeted incentives. Both statements are true in their lanes. Together, they reveal the move. Generosity masks labor. Incentives steer labor without admitting it's labor. Here's the tell. When shortages hit, euphemism thins. Texts ping. Extra $20 if you complete both visits this week. Hours extend. New donor bonuses jump. Suddenly, the cadence sounds like staffing because it is staffing. The metronome the Food and Drug Administration wrote into regulation, twice a week with intervals, turns into a schedule that apps enforce to the minute. Donor engagement becomes attendant. The same language machine scrubs citing decisions. When critics note clustering in deep poverty tracts, the reply is accessibility for our donors. When reporters ask about pay floors, its compensation offsets time and travel. When they press on the spread between $45 at the chair and hundreds to over $1,000 downstream per liter across products, the answer returns to critical, irreplaceable therapy. All accurate, all partial, all orbiting recipients to keep attention off the front door. This is ethical laundering by phrasing. Paid plasma borrows the halo of unpaid whole blood. Cookies and juice at a school gym become visual cover for the recliner beside a payday lender. The chasing arrows of community get stamped on a commodity export that in 2023 brought in roughly $37 billion, more than coal and gold. Patients benefit, so do balance sheets. The people who keep the calendar don't see either headline, they see the mural that keeps the routine dignified. Patients, to their credit, complicate the narrative with honesty. A mother filming a thank you for her child's IVIG infusion says, "Your time lets my kid breathe." She doesn't say donation. She says time, the currency that donors spend and the system banks. Some centers avoid that phrasing because it brushes against rights, rest, and pay. But it's closer to the truth than any poster. The past still flickers through the copy. After the prison-sourced plasma scandals of the 197s and 198s and the HIV and hepatitis tragedies, companies rebuilt trust with technical language. Virus inactivation, nucleic acid testing, lot traceability. Those words matter for recipients. They also became a shield for the compensation model, as if clean manufacturing resolves the question of whose bodies fund reliability. Safety engineering solved yesterday's catastrophe. Semantics managed today's discomfort. In the lobby, it's easy to accept the frame. Gratitude softens extraction. Calling it donation lets a student believe he's bridging finals and doing good. It lets a driver tell herself tonight's diapers come with virtue. It lets executives talk about securing supply while citing maps shadow wage maps. The word choice is anesthesia. Then a shortage snaps the sedation. The same app that celebrates community starts sounding like a scheduler. The mural gets a new balloon and a nurse 3 cities away tells a patient, "We have to space your doses." In that moment, the vocabulary shows its seams. This isn't a gift economy. It's a labor system built on carefully chosen words. Changing the script won't fill tanks, but it might make the next choices clearer. Call high-frequency donors what they are: people doing paid biological work that supports therapies the world relies on. Keep the gratitude, add the truth. Because the pipeline doesn't run on language. It runs on Tuesdays and Fridays, and on lives arranged around a word that made it all feel generous. The tainted past, scandals that rewrote the rules. The murals don't show this room. It's the 197s, and quiet warnings are building in stainless steel tanks. Hemophilia patients, freed from constant bleeding by little bottles of factor concentrate made from pooled plasma, begin turning up jaundiced. Hepatitis climbs first. Then a new terror moves without a name. Before anyone calls it HIV, it rides through lots built from tens of thousands of donations. Pooling, what made therapy possible, multiplies a single bad draw into a nationwide dose. Micro story, a teenager with hemophilia learns to self-infuse at his kitchen table, a miracle compared to hospital stays. 2 years later, fatigue swamps him. A doctor frowns at lab results and says hepatitis. Months after another call, we need to talk about a new virus. His mother keeps vials in the fridge like hope in glass. They didn't know those lots were blended from sources nobody could fully vouch for. He doesn't live to see the word inquiry printed on government letterhead. The quest for volume went hunting for cheap sources and found prisons. In Arkansas, an inmate plasma program shipped product in the 197s and 198s, moving units through brokers and across borders. Oversight was lax, screening bent under profit pressure. Paper trails led from cell blocks to fractionation plants overseas. When recipients in Canada and the United Kingdom fell ill, investigators traced the chain back to clinics that traded privileges for plasma and cut corners to hit quotas. Canada's response was the Crever Inquiry, a years-long reckoning that named failures clearly: delayed hepatitis C screening, slow adoption of HIV antibody tests, weak traceability, and a procurement system that put supply fears over safety. Justice Horace Crever's conclusions hardened into principles: precaution first, victims worthy of compensation, and a bias toward voluntary blood. The United Kingdom ran its own inquiries, tallying infections, scrutinizing regulators, and pressing companies on what they knew when. Families testified through grief, committees wrote through shame, policy shifted. Inside boardrooms, lawyers drafted settlements while executives insisted they followed the science of the time. In a narrow sense, some were right. Tests didn't exist, then did. Inactivation steps weren't standard, then were. But the model's core risk was older than any assay. Scale amplifies error. When you blend tens of thousands of liters to extract grams, a single infected unit can echo across a continent. The fix came in layers. Heat treatment and solvent detergent inactivation became non-negotiable. Lots were quarantined longer. Nucleic acid testing shrank diagnostic windows. Traceability tightened so pharmacists could track a bag back through a batch number instead of guessing. Recipient safety transformed. Confidence returned unevenly. In places where prison plasma made headlines, paid fused with unsafe in the public mind. Industry framed Arkansas as a bad actor in a darker era, and there's truth in that. But incentives didn't vanish, they migrated. Instead of prison clinics, storefronts multiplied in neighborhoods with the least slack. Instead of paper logs, biometric scanners enforced frequency. The river ran cleaner. The riverbed, the push for volume from people with few options, barely changed. Micro story, a former corrections officer remembers dawn shipments, boxes with codes, not names, loading into a van. Decades later, he reads about infected recipients overseas and feels the floor drop. Today, a center manager prints a sheet with completes, not names. Different decade, familiar grammar. Inquiries left more than blame, they left instructions. Crever warned that delay in the face of plausible blood-borne risk is unconscionable. Regulators absorbed that lesson for recipients. They didn't extend it to donors. Precaution hardened into law on one end of the IV line. On the other, eligibility checklists stood in for long-term health tracking. We learned to engineer filters. We didn't learn to price dignity or to distribute biological risk away from the poorest. There's an irony baked into the aftermath. The very scandals that pushed countries to reject paying for plasma domestically deepened their dependence on imports. If you forbid compensation at home, but your hospitals need IVIG and albumin, you buy from abroad, largely from the United States, where compensation is legal and volume is king. The moral hazard ships with the invoice. Ministers defend altruism locally, then sign tenders for products sourced from paid Americans. Patients need bags, budgets need predictability. Dissonance hides in procurement. Families who lost loved ones never got a clean line between ignorance, negligence, and greed. The answer is messy, all three in different measures at different times. Companies settled some claims, fought others, and rebuilt process with real rigor. Recipients became safer than ever. The lesson etched in stainless wasn't just technical, it was structural. Scale multiplies harm when opacity and hunger for volume meet. Today, lot release charts and validation binders look nothing like the 198s. Sit in a recliner beside a payday lender and the incentive looks exactly the same. Keep the river full. We keep this footnote because it's a mirror. It shows what happens when throughput outruns judgment, when the cheapest sources seem like solutions, when paperwork stands in for people. The industry's science is better now. The incentives didn't shift enough, which is why whenever someone says donation, the stain of those decades still shadows the word. We fixed the filters. We never fully fixed the bargain. The disruption mirage, lab plasma and synthetic paths. After shortages and scandals, the question sounds like common sense. Can't we build this in steel and silicon instead of leaning on Tuesdays and Fridays? Parts of that future already showed up. Recombinant clotting factors pulled many hemophilia patients off plasma products and changed their lives. But the engine of this market, IVIG, didn't budge. Here, that's why the lab keeps stalling where the clinic keeps winning. IgG isn't a single key. It's a crowded keyring built from thousands of people's immune histories. Every cold, vaccine, and virus etches another notch. When you infuse IVIG, you aren't delivering one sniper. You're delivering a militia that covers angles you didn't know you'd need. Bioreactors are excellent at making one perfect monoclonal. They're far worse at manufacturing a polyclonal neighborhood with the same shifting breadth and balance. So the near-term play is subtraction, not replacement. Drugs that block the FcRn receptor, the body's recycling center for IgG, lower overall IgG levels and can calm autoimmune attacks, sometimes reducing or delaying IVIG. It's smart. It helps in select diseases, but it doesn't give a person with a primary immunodeficiency the toolbox they're missing. It's trimming the hedge, not planting a tree. Another lane promises engineered cocktails, a dozen or more recombinant antibodies blended to mimic polyclonal behavior. On a whiteboard, it's elegant. Pick targets, dial affinities, blend to spec. In a body, the problem blooms. The immune system evolves responses in real time, across seasons and pathogens, with nuances we still map poorly. Capturing the right spread for every indication, age group, and outbreak isn't one cocktail. It's a moving catalog priced like a boutique. Meanwhile, fractionators didn't wait for disruption. They tightened what worked. Chromatography got cleaner. Virus inactivation stacked redundancy. Process tweaks squeezed more IgG per liter. Process intensification in investor slides, steadier bags for clinics in practice. Each gain makes the old model cheaper and safer at the exact moment a challenger needs the pain to stay visible. Disruption runs into an incumbent that keeps fixing yesterday's flaw before tomorrow's pitch arrives. Monoclonals sit off to the side, huge and precise, and solve different problems. A monoclonal is a laser. IVIG is a Swiss Army knife. When your disease keeps changing its mind, or you don't know which pathway is guilty, the knife still wins. That gap is why, 8 decades after Edwin Cohn's first cuts, IVIG remains the line item that anchors plants, contracts, and calendars. Timelines betray the hype. Pitch decks love a 5-year horizon to approval, tend to scale. Labs live on delays, scale-up stumbles, stability surprises, immunogenicity in phase II, manufacturing variances, payer pushback. Patients can't pause infusions to wait out an optimistic Gantt chart. Hospitals can't budget for maybe. Even when an engineered option lands, it lands as an adjunct, not a replacement, and the plasma trucks keep rolling. Capital makes the rest of the argument. If you've sunk billions into stainless steel, validated steps, and global distribution, and your raw material flows from a policy carve-out that the United States defends while many peers won't, you hedge, you don't torch the base. You buy small stakes in disruptors, ink partnerships, put innovation on slides, and open 5 new centers on bus lines. The river you know keeps paying for the lab you might need later. Who loses if a true substitute finally arrives? Donors first, because streak ladders collapse with the chairs. Fractionators next, plants at risk of becoming stranded assets unless they pivot hard. Patients could win if prices fall and access widens, but novel biologics rarely arrive cheap, and insurers ration by spreadsheet before clinicians thrill at science. The river doesn't dry up. It braids, new drugs peel off some demand while the old current runs for everyone else. Micro story, a researcher in a windowless suite watches a clean chromatogram peek. Her designed cocktail bound what it should. She texts her dad a photo. He gets IVIG on first Fridays and hasn't had bronchitis in a year. Soon, she writes. 3 years later, the trial helps a narrow slice of one disease. Her dad still books Fridays. She keeps going. Both can be true. Here's the blunt bottom line. The science to dent IVIG demand is real and moving. The science to replace a human polyclonal library at scale isn't on the truck yet. Even when it is, policy and capital will decide who touches it and when. Until then, we're back to Tuesdays and Fridays, propped up by a social choice, not a lab limitation. The fastest way to lower the biological cost of this miracle isn't a bioreactor. It's a country deciding poverty isn't a supply chain. The social mirror. Why the US supplies the world. Stand back from the tanks and the strip malls and look at the scaffolding underneath. The United States didn't become the world's reservoir of plasma by accident. It did it the American way, by building a market where a safety net should be, and by wrapping the transaction in the word donation, so it felt like service, not survival. When wages stall, when paid time off is a rumor, when a co-pay topples rent, a door that turns time into cash by nightfall becomes infrastructure. The missing floor comes first. Budgets at the bottom run on small denominators. Bus fare, diapers, a late fee that metastasizes if you blink. Sick days aren't paid, shifts are variable, childcare is a puzzle. In that space, a center offering $45 for 90 minutes with a streak bonus if you hit both visits slides in as the only predictable plug. It's not charity, it's a patch over a policy crack. Healthcare costs widen the hole. Even insured families stare at deductibles like cliffs. You can't afford the clinic, but you can sit in a recliner that looks like one and leave with a prepaid card that loads by 6 p.m. The irony is sharp. People help produce therapies they couldn't buy at list price. They know it. They don't dwell on it. The bus comes at 6:10. Culture greases the gears. America is unusually at ease monetizing the body. Paid clinical trials, egg retrieval, surrogacy in many states, even stool banks. Hustle culture praises sacrifice as grit. Plasma fits neatly, respectable side income that's also a good deed. Murals do the rest. Heroes sit here lets a Tuesday feel like more than a bill, and that story helps you walk back in on Friday. Policy takes its cues from that comfort. A legal carve-out that allows compensation for plasma, but not whole blood, turns donor into a category that sidesteps labor rules. The Food and Drug Administration writes the metronome twice weekly with intervals, protein and hemoglobin minimums, so apps can ping at minute 1. Labor agencies don't classify high-frequency donors as workers. Health departments rarely compile long-term donor protein and ferritin data across firms. Safety gets engineered for recipients. Scarcity gets managed with bonuses. The siting map isn't random, it's responsive. Put a dependable payout beside unstable work and you'll build a habit. Place doors along bus lines and near discount grocers, and you'll find people who can't afford to waste time. Zoning that treats centers like medical offices invites clustering in retail deserts where clinics shuttered years ago. Landlords love steady tenants. A bright, clean storefront reads as community health, not extraction. Optics are strategy. International demand locks the arrangement in place. Many countries discourage or ban paying for plasma at home, then import plasma-derived products anyway. Hospitals abroad need IVIG and albumin now, not someday. Contracts write need into invoices that point to U.S. factories. Ministers defend altruism domestically while budgeting for vials sourced from paid Americans. The result is a moral export. We ship bottles and import dissonance, and the exports, roughly $37 billion in 2023, out-earn coal and gold. Labor markets tune the volume by the week. When unemployment rises, lines lengthen. When stimulus checks land, chairs thin. When daycare closes, frequency slips. When gig work surges, plasma pays for gas. The system is exquisitely sensitive at the bottom and largely insulated at the top. Executives adjust bonuses. Hospitals juggle allocations. Donors juggle sleep. Geography adds friction donors have to absorb. Transit deserts turn a 90-minute visit into half a day. Food deserts make eat more protein expensive advice. Housing precarity makes rest a riddle. The same neighborhoods that lack primary care get gleaming plasma centers because those centers solve someone else's problem, a factory's hunger for leaders. It's not a conspiracy. It's gravity pulling practical choices in one direction. Micro story, a public school custodian loses a Saturday shift when budget's tight. He adds Friday plasma to keep his kid in soccer cleats. The coach thanks volunteers at halftime. The mural thanks heroes by the snack table. Both are true. Neither mentions a city council vote that cut hours or a legislature that froze wages. Plasma becomes duct tape over a policy seam. Patients sit on the other side of the mirror. A mother filming a thank you for her child's IVIG infusion says, "Your time lets my kid breathe." She doesn't see the sighting map, the streak ladder, the defer slip that erased grocery money. She sees a bag spike on time. Asking her to carry the ethics is cruel. Rules and budgets are built elsewhere. Reform sounds risky because dependence is real. Raise pay floors meaningfully. Do you attract new donors or push frequency toward depletion? Restrict clustering in deep poverty tracts. Do you shrink supply and trigger rationing? Encourage paid collection abroad with guardrails. Do you export the same inequities? Hold to unpaid plasma at home. Are you ready to ration therapies? Every lever touches a nurse's calendar. But stasis isn't neutral. It's a choice to keep scarcity as fuel. There are options between collapse and indifference. Peg pay to downstream value so the spread isn't extracted from empty pantries. Fund recovery with meals, transit, and childcare so rest isn't pretend. Published or identified longitudinal donor health data so slow harm is visible. Require ethical sourcing in hospital contracts. Share the burden internationally instead of free riding on American poverty. Zoom out one last time. Why does the United States supply roughly 70% of the world's plasma? Because we normalized paying for it while others didn't. Because we turned need into schedule. Because patients can't wait and markets move faster than parliaments. And because words, donation, community, heroes made an extractive routine feel honorable. The mirror isn't kind or cruel. The lever's clear. Reform without breaking clarity is we can't pull the plug on Thursdays in infusion rooms. The fix has to keep the bag steady and move the burden off forearms and empty pantries. So start where the spread lives, at the floor. Peg base compensation to downstream value, transparently. If an average leader realizes hundreds to over $1,000 across albumin, Ig-G, and other proteins, the base can't stall at 45 while yield optimization lifts guidance. Set a published percentage and phase it in over a year so centers and contracts can adjust without chaos. Cap new donor-only spikes that churn people through unsafe streaks and redirect incentives toward retention with rest. Decouple survival from supply so recovery isn't a pep talk. Tie frequency caps to supports that make physiology possible. Meal vouchers aligned to donation days. Transit passes so a 90-minute visit isn't a half-day loss. Childcare partnerships during peak hours. Fund it with a small levy per liter paid by fractionators into a donor support pool, plus procurement rules that require proof of supports as a condition of contract. When recovery is affordable, borderline protein and ferritin don't become someone's baseline. Turn snapshots into films. Mandate to identified longitudinal reporting on donor health, total protein, ferritin deferrals, adverse events, linked by encrypted IDs across companies and years. Park the data with a neutral steward, NIH, CDC, or a state consortium, and publish quarterly dashboards by county. Centers already collect the numbers for eligibility. The gap is aggregation and sunlight. With films instead of snapshots, policymakers can spot slow harm before an ER does. And frequency rules can bend to evidence, not assumption. Procurement is leverage with a purchase order. Group purchasers and hospital systems already demand pedigree and stability. Add ethical sourcing. Contracts should require minimum pay floors pegged to leader value, verified donor supports, participation in the public data network, and clawbacks for bonus ladders that induce unsafe frequency. If a supplier misses those marks, price alone shouldn't win the bid. That standard shifts the conversation from murals to metrics and makes community show up in ledgers. Resilience can be policy, not luck. Build a strategic Ig-G buffer. Formalize the safety inventory that already exists in warehouses, funded by a modest per gram fee. Set release rules for shocks, border closures, pandemics, transport failures. Pair the reserve with a rapid response fund that covers patient travel for alternative sites, home infusion transitions, and insurer overrides during brand substitution. Nurses shouldn't ration with pencils. They should pull from a playbook everyone agreed to before the storm. Tune the metronome without snapping it. Keep the Food and Drug Administration's twice-weekly cap, but add paid rest credits. For every run of, say, 8 completes, a funded recovery week triggers automatically, money without a stick, time without a penalty. require centers to stagger high-frequency donors so local depletion waves don't form, backstop it with spot checks and fines large enough to matter, tie eligibility guidance to nutrition reality by integrating with SNAP and WIC partners that can deliver high-protein foods keyed to donation schedules. Language can carry law. Create a hybrid classification for high-frequency donors, biological workers for the purpose of basic labor protections, rest breaks, incident reporting, anti-retaliation, clear injury coverage. Keep the altruistic frame for unpaid whole blood. Don't pretend the chairs on bus lines are the same. Acknowledge paid biological work with the same respect we give to people who make medicine in plants. You can still say thank you. You should also pay for a blown vein to heal on the clock. Don't export the problem, diversify it with guardrails. Pilot compensated collection in importing countries under strict terms. Compensation pegs, public data, citing equity, independent ombuds offices, and procurement tied to meeting those standards. If hospitals in Paris or Toronto rely on IG made from paid plasma, share the ethical and biological load instead of free riding on American poverty. Spread risk so a bus route in El Paso doesn't throttle neurology in Turin months later. Micro story, a center in Dayton adopts the full package. Pay pegged to leader value, bus passes, meal vouchers, Saturday childcare, public dashboards, deferrals for low protein drop, complete stabilize without Sunday blitzes, ER visits among frequent donors dip in county stats. Downstream, release rates smooth because inputs are steadier. Upstate, a nurse stops spacing infusions so often. The donor who used to chug water to clear a recheck now eats eggs the night before because a voucher made protein simple, not aspirational. None of this breaks care. It strengthens it by moving the price of reliability from tired bodies to budget size to bear it. The dollars are already in the system. 37 billion in exports says so. The question is where they land, on guidance slides or on meals, transit, childcare, rest, and public data. If the United States is going to be the reservoir the world depends on, it can also be the standard for how you treat the people who keep the tanks full. The reckoning, who we choose to be. Two futures sit across from each other like chairs in a clinic. In the first, we keep the metronome. Centers cluster where groceries are far and buses are near. Apps push streaks, 2 a week becomes a lifestyle, and the word donation keeps the moral fog low. Hospitals get product, patients get doses, investors get guidance, and the people in recliners get snacks, thanks, and $45 that buys tonight, not next month. Shortages still arrive whenever shocks hit the poorest first. Press releases call it resilience. Nurses call it rescheduling. Donors call it making rent. In the second, we choose dignity as infrastructure. We peg base pay to downstream value so the spread isn't taken from empty pantries. We fund meals, transit, and childcare so recovery isn't pretend. We treat high-frequency donors as biological workers for protections and as neighbors for respect. We publish donor protein and ferritin trends like water quality so slow harm can't hide. We cite centers with equity and prove it with maps. We build IG buffers so rationing isn't a pencil exercise. And we tell the truth out loud. This lifeline runs through people's time and blood, not slogans. Therapies don't change in either future. Thursdays still need bags. The difference is where risk lands. One path uses scarcity as fuel and gratitude as cover. The other moves cost into budgets built to carry it, pays for rest, and treats Tuesday and Friday like shifts that deserve recovery. Patients aren't asked to carry the ethics. Policymakers are. Micro story, a donor graduates. She started in a faint room, learned the hacks, salt, water, oatmeal, and held her family together on bonuses and grit. Then a union raise at work loosened the ladder. She cut back to once a month, then stopped. Months later, she walked in with no pressure in her chest and signed the thank you wall writing, because someone once helped me. The word donor finally fit without a prepaid card attached. There's fear that any shift breaks the miracle. That fear once kept bad lots moving and later turned shortages into headwinds. But the brittleness we saw came from building a global therapy chain on people with the least slack. When rest is paid, protein is affordable, and transit is covered, the miracle gets sturdier, not softer. Plants release lots on time because inputs are steadier. Hospitals stop triaging with pencil. Donors stop living in biological overdraft to keep calendars full. We don't need purity, we need better. We can admit language did too much work and data did too little. We can stop outsourcing the ethics of supply to zip codes that never voted on it. Importing countries can share the burden they already share in practice, instead of laundering moral comfort through procurement. And we can keep one clinical truth close. None of this is abstract to the teenager waiting for Friday's IVIG. Set one more chair, the next shock. It's coming: pandemic, recession, border closure, rumor, or a real safety signal we owe the courage to face. When it hits, which story do we want to be caught inside? The one that calls donors heroes while treating them like parts, or the one that treats them like people and thanks them like heroes? The reckoning isn't punishment. It's a choice to be the country that built a fair supply, not just a large one. Every vial that steadies a life is built on lives that learned to steady themselves on $45 and a thank you wall. If you want more stories that name the systems shaping your day, subscribe now. Share this with someone who's ever donated for gas. Then watch our next episode on the hidden markets inside your home. The price tags you never see are the ones quietly running your life.